Empathy is knowing our own darkness well enough to sin.
So without that connection, you don't have anything.
What's the opposite of addiction?
It's freedom.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 50th, the 0 episode of Finding Peaks Recovery Centers. Who would have thought from episode 1 to episode 50? So no pressure to our guests today to make this an absolutely fantastic episode 50 here at Finding Peaks. Looking forward to it. You all may remember a couple weeks ago, even several weeks ago, Jason and Clint and I tried to address cultural and societal norms and its impact on individuals, or at least the impact we see on individuals within substance use disorder and mental health primary settings, such as Peaks Recovery Centers. And it trailed off a little bit into more of a gender-specific treatment episode. In regards, I think we navigated it as best we could, but maybe not the best. And then I was sitting in a training opportunity within our company culture that we do on Tuesdays, and these two fantastic individuals with us today did a phenomenal job actually about bringing that education into our setting. And I thought those were the individuals that needed to be on this episode that Jason and Clinton and I just could not get right. So I'm joined today by Kimberly Holcomb. Welcome. She is the family service specialist at Peaks Recovery Centers, master's in sociology, and working on her certified addiction specialist licensure. Congrats on that direction. Thank you for being here. And then also joined by Pema White, primary therapist for Peaks Recovery Centers, also working on our family programming. In that regard, licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor, meaning she has a master's in all the things. So we've got those talents on board. And if you come into, Peaks Recovery Centers or otherwise, if you are a patient of ours or a family member, you cannot come through this program without seeing these two individuals. It is nearly impossible in that regard. So thank you both for being with me today and joining us here on Finding Peaks. And let's get after it. So cultural and societal norms and the impact of those individual experiences and what we see within our setting at Peaks Recovery Centers. So what is it, before we kind of dive in here, that kind of inspires you guys about this topic in the first place?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, looking at culture, I find it inspiring because it's all of us. Right? There's a great quote by David Foster Wallace. He was giving a commencement speech once, and he talked about, two fish swimming downstream, and there's this older fish that's swimming upstream and says, "Hey, fellas, how's the water?" And they just kind of wave him off, and a little while later, the one fish turns to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Right? And that's culture to me, right? This thing that we're moving through, whether it's familial culture or culture on a larger scale, we're moving through it, we're creating it as we go, we're influenced by it, we learn from it, all of that. And yet, we don't tend to take a look at it critically or to look at the ways it impacts our lives and our trajectories in terms of, all the things, but certainly maybe addiction and mental health and all of that. So it's kind of the water we're swimming in, but not really aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think I would say that, from an individual perspective, that it's just so fascinating. One part I just love about my job is being able to hear someone's story as the expert. And when I was doing my master's program, there was all of these categorized. As when you work with Native American folks, then you need to be aware of this, and when you work with these cultures, be aware of this. And I remember at the time thinking how overwhelming as a therapist I would have to learn all the cultures and all the ways to navigate cultures. And and I'm like, there must be an easier way. There is. You just simply ask someone, right? Because it doesn't matter how many boxes I understand. It matters how they understand their box, and if they even have a box or see it as that. And so I think a lot of times I'll see assumptions being made, and in staffings and things like that. Oh, well, we're dealing with this type of culture, then we have to have this approach. I'm like, is that true? Is that true for that individual? Did anyone bother to ask them? And so being able to sit down and hear someone's story about the boxes they've been put in and how that's impacted them and affected them and the box they're trying to be put in. And sometimes it's a rejection of a culture that they're asking for. Stop seeing me as this and stop treating me as this. Or because of my, trauma and experiences, I want nothing to do with this. And, and so a lot of times hearing that and then allowing that person to, to be the expert at something for once in their life. Usually like when you come through treatment, you're told where to go and where to sit and what diagnosis you have and how the program is going to be laid out and how you're going to fit into it can sometimes be very overwhelming and frustrating. And so sometimes just I think the best way to approach it is just to hear how that person's environment and experience is going to, help us understand them.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for bringing forward what makes you both passionate about this topic. I'm going to attempt slightly. It's not something that I need a response to, but just slightly create an analogy through philosophy. So I'm going to try and bring my bread and butter to this. Jean Sartre, French philosopher, famous existentialist, infamously said that essence precedes existence, meaning that our experiences come prior to these essential features as which historically in philosophy, the essential aspects of ourselves was thought to, we believed that those were more rudimentary and fundamental to our nature, where our experiences are the actual thriving thing. And so with this, it seems like in regards to culture and societal norms, right, that an individual has their own experience within the world, but there are experiences behind it, in front of it, that thinks this is actually the way the individual ought to be in that sort of way. And so for me, this topic is inspiring, and it resonates with me that there's sort of a challenge of authenticity here. How I feel authentic within the world through my own personal experiences, yet at the same time, maybe my family, my friends, or otherwise told me I actually should be experiencing the world in this way because this is the way that the world works. Yes. And so laying the foundation of authenticity and what that is like, I think, is an important aspect of this before we start grinding away at some question here. So what does it mean to be authentic, and what are some of the examples of what this might look like in sort of maybe everyday life, if not just keeping it rooted within what we see at Peaks in that regard? And we can go either way. Whoever's excited here, fire away.
I use the term true north with clients, and a lot of times that kind of opens the door of like, wow, no one's asked me what my true north is, and and how it seems like that should be for everybody's, right? Because on the dial of a compass, north is north, right? And we all got to head that direction, and it's not agreed upon. And so, for someone to show up authentically, I think in both positive and negative ways, it's a sense of feeling accepted for who you are. From something as small as just, hey, how are you? And being able to answer that question authentically, right? I don't have to tell you I'm good if I'm not good. And if I do that enough times and I show up authentically, then when I am good, you'll believe it. And when I say, well, I'm weathering the weather, then you'll believe it, right? But also in big ways to be able to, if that's safe to do, then maybe the next question is safe as well, and that I can start showing up and know that I can be trusted, or that you could be trusted, that you will accept me, and it's safe to be authentic and show up as who I am.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I love that. I completely agree with that, right? Like sort of learning incrementally that it's okay to be authentic, that it's okay to show up. I think so many times we hear, and whether it's from family, friends, or again, like society writ large, all of these messages about who we should be based upon what folks around us think we are categorized as, right? And so I think the tendency over time is to begin to pare ourselves down to fit into these narrower and narrower boxes, to hide certain aspects of ourselves if maybe our family has told us those are wrong or those aren't okay. And the more we do that, the further away we get from our true north, from ourselves. And that doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel good. And so we're living out our daily lives in speech and behavior in ways that don't feel true to us, but are instead like placating those around us and these ideas of who we've been told we should be. And that's a separation of self from self.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so what does it look like when people begin to move away from their authentic selves? And how does this happen? You know, so I can imagine a family is sitting at home, maybe noticing that, you know, Johnny, in a certain example, behaves in a certain way when we come at him in this way, and then something changes in that process. Are there, you know, are there telltale signs maybe that, you know, family systems at home or those within, you know, the, you know, political landscape or otherwise, or however it's being absorbed through the lens here at Finding Peaks, for which, you know, they can notice when a person is moving away from their authentic selves, or, you know, what do those tripwires look like?
Yeah, I think that's different for everyone. If I can just reference, you know, a family meeting we just sat on, and it was interesting that when we were talking about relapse and what relapse warning signs are, it was, you know, most of them are like, oh, it's very clear. They isolate and they shut down and they stop responding. And it was interesting that one person was like, yeah, no, that's actually my, you know, how I notice is my son, you know, my child does the opposite. And so, you know, to speak to like, that's maybe 90% of the warning signs of depression. But sometimes it's the opposite, that if that is their normal and they're normally quiet and reserved, that all of a sudden they're coming out of their shell and it's not looking healthy in that way, that they're, you know, have too much energy and are way too social, then that's the warning sign. And so I think is like, you know, when you know someone in their healthy state, and then what is happening when they are unhealthy is different for all of us. So, you know, I think for me, my true north, obviously, we just finished talking, like everyone says I'm secure, right? So, you know, when I start saying I'm feeling a little nervous, I'm having a little hesitancy, and you know, and it may sound appropriate and normal, and people can relate to it, but when someone looks at me and says, that's not something you usually say, what's going on, right? So then that it feels like, oh, then I know it's safe to be authentic.
Yeah.
It's safe that these people are okay to tell that I'm upset or anxious or, you know, having some insecurities.
Yeah. One of the, and we'll get to your side of this as well, Kimberly, of course, but, you know, an example that, you know, comes to mind for me is I'm thinking about a past patient at Peaks Recovery Centers, and this individual suffered from a significant mental health disorder, and there's a family gaining knowledge about this disorder, learning it in real time, trying to figure out a path forward to make this the best outcome possible, and at the same time, dad in this regard is really calling on son to, you know, sort of get out of the basement inevitably at the end of the day and get a job. This sort of societal norm, right, that you have to be working. But for this individual, working in the world is going to look entirely different. And out of that, it feels like that's the societal norm tension pulling on a major, you know, an authentic, a piece of authenticity for the individual, in the way that this individual's experiences in the world isn't always going to give him an opportunity to be the best that he can be in the strict sense of a 40-hour work week as a societal norm. And there's still this sort of negative tone in the background, right, of like, you know, tie the bootstraps up and get out there and get into the workforce and get out of the basement. And it's those types of things that I just wanted to create an example of and get your feedback on and reel on that. Is that kind of correctly what we're looking at here? Is sort of even if it's a benign example, at least an example of kind of tension that's created between the norms and where the person is authentically living their life?
I think it certainly can be, absolutely. You know, the thing that comes to mind for me, and this is where I think particularly the clinical team has their work cut out for them, is that a lot of times these messages, and wherever they're coming from, whether it's television and other media or family or anything, they begin so early on in life, and they occur so frequently that I think a lot of times folks who are coming in, clients who are coming into Peaks, like they may be unaware, right? Like that water, they may be unaware of these sort of messages they've internalized, and the ways those messages have caused them to sort of rearrange the parts of themselves away from being that authentic self. So part of, I think, the brilliant work of the clinical team is to kind of find where those might be. And a lot of times I think that's where a lot of the issue lies, in terms of, you know, why I may have started using substances, or why I fell, you know, so deeply into a depression. And of course it's not, causality isn't clean and sharp, right? But these may have to do with it, right? And how can we figure out what messages you were receiving about who you experienced yourself to be authentically, But then we're told like, that's not okay in whatever way, or knowing that doesn't fit me, right? I'm not gonna be able to work a 40-hour work week, or, you know, I don't feel comfortable wearing those sorts of clothes, or whatever the case may be, but feeling as though you're sort of squeezed and distilled into this, into like a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
I think I see it, what I love about families and working with families is so often I will see, because we will work with an individual before we really do some of the family, at least the intense family work. And so I will meet this person on, you know, completely different terms than anybody else knows them. You know, certainly in a therapy session, you get generally a lot of authenticity, you know, and if you're doing it right,
Right. Yeah.
that's the ideal.
Yeah. Not to toot your own horn, but if you do it right.
If you do it right, you know, and I can't say that I always do it right, so I know when it's done right, because I'm like, oh, here it is, right? That, you know, you put them back in the family environment, even if it's just, you know, a family on the screen, and I'll see a different person. And so that is really valuable also, you know, afterwards to sort of talk about that and like, wow, you showed up completely different when these other people were present. What's going on there? And they can, you know, then they can speak to it. And oftentimes they don't even realize it until you're like, you even sat differently, you used different words, you even said the exact opposite of what you told me yesterday, right? And you know, and so when you're able to point that out safely and gently, people can start realizing like, I do speak differently in these realms, and it doesn't, and this is why I do it. And so being able to kind of point out, I was like, well, is that because yesterday you were someone that didn't feel good? Like, did I create a space where you felt like you had to tell me what I wanted to hear? Because that happens in a therapy session, right? And in the teacher session, in any kind of session. You know, or is there something going on that these people expect something from you? And it's really beautiful sometimes when you can bring them together and have a, you know, parent say, well, I thought I was promoting something that was true to you, right? I had no idea. Like, you said you wanted to do this 10 years ago. I was just promoting it this whole time. And they're like, well, I changed my mind 8 years ago, right? Yeah. And they just never learned how to have a conversation about how to be real with each other and be authentic and have a person say, I didn't know my person would support me if I changed or if I was different. And then, you know, that's the good case scenario, I guess, right?
Absolutely.
Where both sides sort of come to this like conclusion, this reality that like I was unaware of this and I was unaware of this, and here we were in these roles, right, without kind of realizing what was going on.
Yeah. And then know that like it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a you problem, it wasn't a me problem, it was this communication problem. And all along, like, you know, depression there's this gap, right? When we don't speak and live authentically, there's a gap between who we, you know, are supposed to be and are expected to be and who we really want to be and where our true north is. And that gap has to be filled. And it gets filled with depression, it gets filled with anxiety, it gets filled with trauma, and substances fill it really effectively for a time. Yeah.
So that our viewers out there aren't, before we dive into responsibility of treatment programming and cultural competency, for the sake of our viewers, so they don't run to Google and think, I got to be a therapist to communicate with my loved one in this regard and to be tactful in that way, you know, what are what's some advice we can give to family systems about how to explore this openly, you know, as a topic where they see tension within the individual regarding authenticity, and maybe it's authenticity is on their part as well too. You know, being curious comes to mind and being inquisitive, asking questions first versus making statements about what we're looking at. But not being the therapist, I don't want to steal the show. You know, what are some advice that we can give to these family systems in support of better connecting tissues between them and their loved ones?
That's a good
big
one. Question.
Yeah,
That's a whole family program.
That wasn't on the questionnaire. That was left field on that one.
Yes. No, I think you know, a great place to start is absolutely the curiosity, right? But also, I do think it's important sometimes for even if it feels implied or whatever the case may be from what your communication is like with each other, but to say, you know, really put forth, I want to be here for you and I want to hear about your experience in the world. I want to know what you're going through and what you've been through, and I'm willing to have that conversation, you know. And I do think sometimes we think that's implied with whoever we're interacting with, and it isn't always, right? A person may be feeling unsafe to be authentic about themselves or their experience or something, and it doesn't mean either side did anything wrong. It just kind of is the way it is. But to hear, I want to know what's going on with you, and I'm curious about that. I want to hear about your experience, and I think is important, just as a starting point.
Yeah. And I think also to be able to relate to that, that if there is, if you sense that there is some moment that your person is someone you love, your partner, whoever that is, maybe struggling with anxiety or depression or substance use, or experienced a trauma, to be able to say, like, it's safe to talk to me. I accept that there's something going on that I don't understand, and I really want to understand. And then when you hear something, when you see that, change or that shift, then to be able to relate it and say, there's pieces of me that I don't share.
Yeah.
And so I know what it's like. And actually, I probably fill a role that is expected from me as well.
Yeah.
That I didn't mean to hand down to you, right? Like I was just passing this down, and we use these terms in treatment, called at least I do, and family legacies. And like sometimes that feels like a inheritance, or right, like you're taking the trophy off the shelf and handing it down. But there's also family legacies of don't say what you feel, and family legacies of play the part, and do this when people are watching, right? And that those are valuable, probably survival tools most often, at least in culture. It was a survival tool, and now that society has changed, or generations have changed, or families are melding, it no longer fits, it no longer works, and we give individuals permission to not pick up that legacy, and then be able to communicate to the people in their lives to say, hey, this is who you are, but it's not who I choose to be, and I hope you accept me for that.
Yeah, beautiful. And if for family systems out there as well too, watching this today, appreciated first and foremost, and secondly as well too, if you find yourself jammed up in these moments and not feeling like even if you're open, as you both have put it, to, hey, I'm here for you, and I want to listen, I want to be involved, and I want to embrace what your authentic self is. How do I do that? If you feel like that isn't getting you where you want to go, certainly I think the next stage of that is, how can I help you get in front of somebody for which you can explore your authentic self, to help communicate with me as a family system and so forth. So always keep in mind professional counselors out there in the world, peers and so forth. Sometimes it's just more comfortable to speak to someone else in that regard. And out of that, I think I just want to give families some grace in this, because it's not always easy to navigate these situations, especially when you pile on a depression, anxious, or SUD diagnosis on top of that as well too. So switching gears slightly, I appreciate you guys fielding the left field question there, but what is the role and responsibility of a treatment program in regards to nurturing authenticity? So the individual arrives at peaks, and how do we get that right?
We ask lots of questions, and we keep asking questions. And then we check in to make sure that we are answering the questions and responding to those questions. So I think, most agencies, especially in mental health and addiction world, have a question at intake of like, tell me about your culture, and how can we, support it in any kind of way. And then I think oftentimes the program takes over, and there's kind of a forget. If there's a really big moment or someone who knows how to advocate for themselves, I think there's a sense of respect for that. But if there's not safe to be authentic in your culture, I think there's a kind of implied like, oh, well, they'll let us know if we need to do something different. Right. And if you take someone who's lived their entire life in not a safe space of letting people know, then that in and of itself is disrespectful to their culture. Or if they come from a culture that doesn't do that, that frowns upon that, and waits for the questions, right? And so I think making space at intake certainly is valuable, but then recognizing as it shows up, knowing that if someone is struggling in any particular environment, that it's likely the environment. And not the person, right? And I mean, sometimes it is the person, but most likely they are responding to something in their environment. And so if we are a treatment provider, we are the environment, and we have control over that, and we can navigate it, and we have the power and staff and ability and experience to kind of put down our own stuff. and be able to say this person is vulnerable, this person is seeking treatment, and this person deserves a little leeway and gentleness in this area. And maybe we don't have to force our program into them. Maybe it's about them, opening up in our program and allowing us to learn from what they have to offer.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I agree, right? The questions need to continue. The curiosity needs to continue, and that a lot of times that's on us. That falls on us as peak staff. I think the other piece of it is for us to continue excavating the ways that our own cultures, whatever they be, affect us and inform our implicit biases or our beliefs about the world, our belief systems, because the more we know about ourselves and about those things, right, the more likely we are to be able to help a client come in and see the water, so to speak, right? I think, and empowering them to tell that story, right? Like you were saying, I mean, we may get to the point where we're assuming, well, because you come from this culture, then, right? If this, then that. And I think that we let them lead the way instead, all the while being mindful of biases implicitly or otherwise that we may have, and continue to be willing to learn and willing to show up for them. And honestly, a big part, I think, for me is to be able to be receptive when a client or anyone else says, that was out of line, or here's why that didn't feel good, because this was said to me, when I was younger, or, I didn't like this, right? And to be okay, to kind of resist that temptation to immediately get defensive and to say, okay, I want to take a look at this. I'm sorry that hurt you, right? And I'm still learning too. And that's the calling out versus, right, or calling in versus calling out, I think. But to continually be aware and be willing to grow, even at times when it's uncomfortable for us.
I celebrate those moments, and I say thank you.
Yes.
It's one of the first conversations I have with my clients. I said, I want you to know that you have every right to challenge me, and I encourage you to do that. And that may not feel safe, and that might not have been safe in the past, but please, if I get it wrong, I'm just a good guesser. Really, I have all these letters after my name, but all they mean is I'm a good guesser.
I'm a good guesser.
And if I guess wrong, I'm not doing either one of us any good.
Right.
And so, and if I know someone is, tends to be quiet and withdrawn or, internal in their experience, then I will be checking in and be like, is this conversation okay? I just challenged something for you, and that may seem easy for me, but I'm wondering how it is for you. And sometimes you can, that was never okay in my house, or, it's okay here. And I want it to be okay in other places in your world. Maybe it's never going to be okay in your family, and that's okay. How do we help you feel safe in those places where you can't be authentic and accept that, but not have to go to, extremes or, experience, incredible depression or anxiety because of that thing you can't control, but also find places in your life where you get to allow yourself to ask good questions or give good feedback. And people will celebrate it and say, thank you.
Thank you for helping me grow.
Right.
Well, Pam, I know you and your husband are probably our biggest fans at Finding Peaks and watching all of the episodes. And, through our episodes, one of the things that I love doing within this host seat is calling, I'm changing my language from calling out to calling on an industry to disrupt its behaviors and to think more dynamically about what we're doing each and every day. And the conversation between you two just now just reminds me of how dynamic our patient demographic is at any given time. And it's also having me think about all of the downward pressure that we experience as an organization, whether it is social or societal and cultural norms, whether it's the insurance company telling us to diligently document and write these notes to their standards, and we have a curriculum, and then we got people coming out of detox into the curriculum. It feels like, we're on this sort of merry-go-round ride, and insert the client each within any given moment onto this merry-go-round that is our curriculum and our 45-day model. I think it exposes how difficult it is to maintain that focus and to sit with the individual and draw them into the experience rather than say, welcome to the experience, let's go, in that regard. So how do we go about ensuring programs like Peaks don't end up making cultural competency a website catchphrase? And how do we actually live out cultural competency each and every day? Because, me and my corner office in the at Peaks in the IOP program, parents might ask me something like, would you guys, embrace cultural competency? And of course, like, I read books. Yes, we do that. But at the same time, right, it's going to change and shift within the environment at all times. And so how does it get from me making a statement about it to making it true within the organization, and then making sure that it's energized at all moments? Maybe too, you're about to tell me what we're doing wrong, but
No, I think we incorporate it into Peak staff culture continually, right? And not just on a quarterly basis or something, but that's a continual conversation that we have amongst ourselves. And I think it's a great idea to incorporate into curriculum that clients are going through as well, right? And it will speak to them. There's no doubt about that. It will speak to them because it is their lived experience in whatever way. And I think that if you continually commit to growing and learning in those ways, you're never going to be doing it wrong. You might not always get it exactly right, but that's part of it, right? There's always more to learn. There's never a monopoly on the information about every culture in all time and place. And continuing to stay curious, continuing to be willing to let defenses down and say, you know what, I didn't get that right, and that's okay, and I apologize, I'm sorry. I'll continue to try to do better. For staff and everyone involved. It's a thing that I feel in our culture, and I think there's improvement, there's room for improvement, as there always will be. But I feel pretty proud of, what's there now, absolutely.
Yeah, same. I definitely will say, like, this happens and it's certainly happening in a developing way. I come from working in social services where, like, it is so very valuable, and it's so very present in court systems and DHS systems that I think when I came in here, there was a bit of a buffer from some obvious, structural issues. And, and so, I thought, I won't be dealing with that anymore. Like, that was a passing thought. It didn't last very long, right? And I'm like, it's in the private sector too. Oh, okay, gotcha. So really quickly, I was like, there's a need for this in a lot of ways. But I also think that, like, from a staff perspective, right? What I love about, our program, I know that might sound like a commercial, but I love our program.
Sell it.
What I love about our program is, like, we bring in people who have these lived experiences. And so I'm constantly referring to the CCAs and the residential managers and, and saying, like, hey, these are your experts. Like, I have the license, but they have the degree. They have this experience that I can't speak to, and vice versa. And so it makes for a great conversation in front of clients and with clients, whenever we are resolving problems, and then there's also this, kind of parallel interaction that happens. So the clients also get to see, like, hey, you did a thing, you said a word, and I'm not okay with it, but I'm wondering, where that comes from. Tell me why this is, part of your culture. Maybe there's something I'm not understanding, and to be able to say, are you aware that, that hurt me, or that might hurt some people when you use that language, right? And that environment, making it natural and organic. I think right after we did the cultural that night or that afternoon, someone said something that, it was kind of side issue. It's not the general, everybody knows you don't comment on these 5 factors of, right? Like, of culture,
The big no's.
right? But not realizing that culture is, in what I eat. Culture is in the shoes I wear. Culture is in, like the, so many aspects that you will never know from your perspective what is culture to me. You have to ask, you have to be aware, and I have to tell you. So to make a flippant kind of remark and say, hey, are you aware? And immediately seeing that, like, oh, I did the thing. And I'm like, thanks for that. Thanks for that, you know? That's valuable. I think on a, just a company culture way.
Absolutely.
Is just one of the ways. I could probably go on for hours on all the other ways that we can implement it.
Yeah, big topic. And we're going to keep doing this together. I love this experience with you both so far. And I think one of the things that comes to mind in hearing you both just now as well too is that societal and cultural norms exist across the LGBTIQ acronym, across the way we see sexuality within culture. There's a variety of different ways to kind of go about it, but also within substance use disorder and mental health primary settings, there are these cultural norms that are created about how we see the addict or how we see the individual coming in. And I think one of the common things that I've seen that we've been in error of is when an individual comes in, kind of the first thing you think, because addiction is such a powerful word and it's so big in our society, is like, what drugs or alcohol brought you into this setting? And I've seen it on several occasions where the individual says, I'm not here for any of that. Like our first response is, there's a disorder and its substances, and what does that look like? And then we're kind of taken back, trying to figure that out. And I'm just curious if you can speak to that a little bit within your experience and in the environment at Peaks.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of how we try to fit a system through, the person. Is, and when someone comes in as, mental health and saying I have depression, and it feels very othered, right? Like I don't belong here because all you guys talk about and your program talks about, and and I come from mental health primary, like that's where my passion started. And in fact, I, sort of rejected the substance abuse realm, and partly because of my culture, right? And not realizing how much culture played a part in my own biases and my own insecurities of saying I can't possibly be helping people in that realm because I haven't resolved some things myself. And then having some really great people in my world going, maybe you should resolve those things, right? I'm like, dang it, dang it. Yeah. It is a nice mirror society here in the treatment world. There's always a reflection. And so, to be able to hear someone say, like, it's okay for me to, drink some champagne at my wedding. It is perfectly fine, and you're not going to stop me. And if you try to, then you're going to disconnect me, and you're going to lose the opportunity to help me manage my depression by trying to fixate on something that you feel is a problem rather than see what I feel is a problem. Because this will be a problem if it's going to be a problem. And if you're not ready to look at it, then it's not my business to make you look at it. It's my business to hear what you see as the problem, and how you feel like you can move forward with it. And so if someone says, don't put me in a sober home because I plan on drinking, and I plan on managing my depression, it doesn't matter what my view is. It doesn't matter what my experience or my education tells me. What matters is that this person is saying, this is what I want help with. And it's our job to say, okay, let's look outside our own boxes and find you an aftercare plan that meets where you say your next step is. Because maybe 10 steps down the road you'll be different, but today what's most important is your next step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think it's up to us, just in the same way that it's not up to us to decide what a person's culture looks like or what it means to them, right? If they're coming to you and saying, this is not what I'm here for, or I know that I came for this reason and not this reason, I think it behooves us to respect that, right? And then sort of develop a plan for their treatment based upon that. I think it also offers some opportunity. A couple clients come to mind that came in as mental health primary, and were sort of like, I'm not like them, right? That kind of idea, and that's an opportunity to say, okay, let's talk about that, right? That calling in, let's look at that. Like, why are we othering, from this group as well? And good for us to learn. There's also been a couple instances of clients who come in and they certainly have had issues with diagnosed substance use disorders, and saying, what brings you here? And they will say, well, it all started when right? And they may be being treated for substance use disorders and be completely on board with that, but but to them, that's not the crux of the issue,
Right.
right? And they wanna let you know what they think was sort of the impetus for this thing, at least where it started back when, and to be able to listen to that and hear that, right? And understand that not everyone conceptualizes substance use disorders or mental health disorders in the same way that we tend to, on a larger scale. I think is always good. More opportunity to learn.
It's always awesome. I mean, I just love, I love a lot about the treatment program. I love to provide treatment. I love groups, I love individuals, but sitting in a group and having the topic be like relapse cycle, right? Or, the cognitive behavioral therapy triangle of, alcohol addiction. And you can get a lot of people on board in that group. Like, yeah, I know exactly how this is going to go, and I can give you all the answers, but you're going to lose a few people.
Yeah.
And especially if alcohol isn't their drug of choice, if it is something other than that, opiates, or and then the person with depression is like, let me know when you guys are done.
Right.
But then when you frame it through, like if someone looks at me and says, well, Pema, are you in recovery? I'll look at them and say, anger is my drug of choice. And everybody in the room can get on board with that.
Yeah.
Right? So we bring them all together to say, it doesn't matter what substance you use. If I punch someone, how is that any better?
Yeah.
Right? Than you drinking. And so what I know is that we all have to manage our emotions.
Yeah.
Can we just agree on that? Can we come to terms with that? And that's always very powerful when, because I've done the CBT cycle for addiction and have half of everybody on board, and it's really helpful to that one person that really wants to understand their drinking patterns. But then I will follow it up with like, well, let's see how this matches with the depression cycle. And then everybody in the room, especially the person who is struggling with the drinking cycle, will be like, yeah, me too. Right?
Yeah.
Actually, that's the bigger
Yeah.
problem. Like it always was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic and beautiful, and I think good glimpses into like a group setting and how you corral all the differences so that people feel invited into the discussion versus like, yeah, just tell me when this is over, and a day of treatment is lost in that regard, right? And many of the things that you guys just had this conversation about as well too. I'm dying to prod at the industry, but I may get clipped from the editors in the studio here. So I'm going to avoid that today. We'll come back more thoughtful, so I don't just jab the industry in the wrong ways. But I want to invite you guys back in the future because this is a big topic, and there's a lot of ways in which we can discuss it, invite people into the conversation and so forth. But before I take us out on this 50th episode, in our exit here, Daryl Davis, Loretta Ross, we want to create a few links for individuals that'll be available for all the kids out there on the social media and the families watching us as well too on the Facebook, because only the elders use Facebook. But in that regard, what do we want to say about these two individuals, and what do we want them thinking about maybe as they go and explore these, YouTube channels and TED Talks?
Yeah, I would just Google those names.
Okay.
Like Daryl, I listened to a podcast of Daryl Davis, and the way that, he is a blues man from the South who managed to get Ku Klux Klan members to hand over their robes. And that, to me, with love.
Yeah.
With love. No violence, no hostility, no judgment. Like he just showed up and kept showing up saying, help me understand what you're saying. Help me understand why you hate me. Help me understand why you hate, all of this. Help me understand why you do what you do. And did it enough times by befriending people who hated him, who were out to get him, who quite likely, created hostility and violence in people that he knew. And he did it because he genuinely wanted to understand that the act of being curious and wanting to understand was more powerful than being hated and being criticized and quite frankly being traumatized by their experiences. And so that is something to always look up to. Like as a person whose anger is their drug of choice, I know how hard that is to do. He's a better man than me. And then Loretta just, says it so beautifully, and just how like when I call you out, I miss an opportunity and I disconnect us.
Yes.
And that teaches neither one of us anything. But when I call you in, I gain an opportunity, and you gain an opportunity to be able to tell me the other side. And it works. It works for people who are being oppressed. to say, hey, help me understand what's happening for you right now. Help me understand why you would say that. Help me understand why you see it this way, because I'm genuinely curious. And when you lean in, people lean in, right? And when you push away, people push away. And it also works for the oppressor. When there's someone in the room who is being derogatory, who is saying a joke that is, certainly off color, to be able to, and rather than humiliate them and shame them, which is unfair. Certainly in treatment centers, it's unethical. And so we have to bring them into the conversation too and say, hey, are you even aware of, how that affects people? And if we have a relationship, then I get to start it. Hopefully this person is hearing it. And then maybe eventually they get to learn that skill of being able to stand up for themselves and build a connection with someone that they never would have had the opportunity to.
Absolutely. I used to tell, my students that you will never get in trouble for ignorance. And I think too often that's our snap, way of responding when situations like this occur. And if you don't know, you don't know, right? And the goal should be to make people aware, right? To increase understanding rather than to say, you said this and you made this mistake and now you're done, you're canceled, right? You're canceled, right? Yeah. I think, this perfectly exemplifies kind of what we've talked about here, right? To go into to Klan meetings and to say, help me understand, right? And certainly that's not the responsibility of every person who's a member of an oppressed group to go, and do this, right? But there had to be a realization on his part that this is cultural messaging that they've received. They're behaving from messages they've received culturally. And it may not have anything to do with who they are authentically. And once they know me, right, once I become an individual and we've connected on that basis, I cease to be just part and parcel of a general grouping, right? It's more difficult to hate someone or to hold beliefs about them when they're just part of this sort of gauzy group of people, right? When you really get to know someone and touch base with them authentically, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely, right? It's one thing to cancel, from the cancel cultural lens, to say you're a racist versus help me reconcile what you just said because I know you in this sort of way.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I believe in your ability to connect. I believe in your ability. I don't think this is coming from a hatred place. I think this is coming from a place that you just don't understand. And I don't understand.
Yeah.
So let's go through this together and come side by side with people. So, I mean, certainly my intention, in understanding and, and building a committee, with my past employer and being able to bring it into this employer and say, hey, this is important. And I'm okay if you don't like me for saying this, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's my job and it's part of my commitment. Is to really come from a place of I knew I was raised, to kind of confront things, and that works sometimes. But more often, it shuts people down, and then I feel like I've just kind of ruined relationships. And so, be a teacher, not a preacher, is right. Like that if we can do that together and learn together, then then I feel like I'm growing. Yeah. That feels good.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for being here, for coming on board. I think we're going to do this again. I had a great time. Nerves a little down now. We got the experience, right? It's just lights, cameras, noises, all that sort of thing. You two are fantastic. You did a wonderful job. Can't wait to have you back to continue to explore this topic so that I can get a new opportunity to jab the industry a little bit through both of your lenses there. And so for everybody, viewers at home, we hope that this was an exceptional 50th episode for you, that it was thought-provoking, insightful. Please check out the links that we provided in regards to Daryl Davis and Loretta Ross. Their TED Talks and podcasts are just brilliant. So finding Peaks at peaksrecovery.com. If you want more insights or opportunities to ask these two professionals that are in front of me right now, more questions in the futures, send us that feedback. Otherwise, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, what else are the kids?
TikToks.
The TikTok. Chris Burns, everybody. Look for Chris Burns on the TikTok. He's loud, he's proud, he's excited. Let's go for recovery, he might say. Until next time, Brandon Burns signing off. So grateful to be here. Happy 50th. Take care, everybody.